Ever since Vampire Survivors released back in 2022, I've been obsessed with bullet heaven roguelikes, playing dozens of games in the genre with over 500 hours combined. But as much as I enjoy this genre, I will admit that many of these games can feel pretty similar, so when one of them does something different, I really appreciate it. Take DRG Survival for example. It allows you to dig through terrain to create your own paths on the stage and collect valuable materials like gold and nitra. Meanwhile, Death Must Die features a Hades-like upgrade system and interactions between playable characters. However, out of all the bullet heavens I've played, none have been quite as unique as Picayune Dreams. Now, the first thing that makes Picayune Dreams so different is that rather than having multiple stages to choose from, you have one stage with sectors. Essentially, sectors are randomly generated areas that you'll explore throughout each run, with you choosing when at the start, and then again after each boss. But what's really cool about them is how they give you more control over your run. Basically, each time you choose a sector, there are a few things that'll happen. For starters, the enemies shown in that sector's preview will start to spawn for the rest of the run. So if there's an enemy you don't like, you can try to avoid sectors that will spawn it. In addition to that though, if you have the skill Remnants of What Was, each sector will also spawn a statue, which will grant buffs or items, but depending on the cost, you might want to think twice before using one. Finally, some sectors may also have modifiers, indicated by these red icons. These will add extra challenges to the sector, while also providing some benefits in return. For example, one modifier makes enemies explode on death, which can hurt you, but also damages other enemies. Meanwhile, another forces you to stockpile XP before giving it back later with a 20% bonus. So, while these choices might seem minor on their own, put together they force you to weigh your options carefully, especially since they're randomly generated. And since the sector previews only hinted what they do, you're encouraged to experiment and take some risks to figure out how everything works. Now, after you've chosen a sector, endless waves of enemies will begin approaching, with waves progressively getting stronger as time passes. But by defeating them and collecting their XP, you'll be able to level up and choose from one of 3 random upgrades to increase your own strength. However, rather than outright telling you what each upgrade does, you'll instead need to decipher their lines of code. Take the core for example. Looking at its code, we can see object_weapon, letting us know that it's a weapon. Meanwhile, a utility item like the DigiWatch increases your cooldown_mod, which can enhance the power of weapons that scale with that stat. What's really cool about these upgrades though, is that you're only restricted by your item limit. Basically, rather than having a set amount of weapons and utility items that you can take as many different upgrades as you want, up to your item limit. And honestly, I really like this as it allows for a lot more unique builds. What's really cool though, is that you can actually change your item limit with certain shrines and items, either letting you carry more items for extra versatility or fewer items to upgrade them more. Now, if I had one complaint, it'd be that there isn't anything like the item evolutions in Vampire Survivors, but it's honestly not that big of a deal with how interesting the items are, or the fact that you can see the equipped items on your character like in Risk of Rain 2. Moving on, after you've leveled up for a bit, you might find yourself effortlessly mowing through enemies, maybe even going AFK with auto-aim and 2x speed enabled. But as you continue to rack up more and more kills, you may start to notice your mortality level increasing, until eventually you get an incoming transmission. Basically what this means is that a boss is approaching, but these aren't your typical bosses, as rather than just being a bullet sponge to deal with alongside the waves of enemies, instead they're intense 1v1 bullet hell battles, demanding your full attention to avoid their onslaught of attacks. Now, aside from just being difficult, these bosses also have a ton of character to them, whether it's their quirky dialogue before each fight, or their distinct designs and unique mechanics and bullet patterns. Each boss feels completely different, making every single one memorable. But what makes them unforgettable is how they tie into the game's story. Basically, after defeating a boss for the first time, they'll drop a USB stick, which unlocks an interactive cutscene to explain the game's story. However, since each boss only reveals a small piece, you'll need to defeat all of them in order to get the full picture. And honestly, I really like this. Rather than feeling like an obstacle, the bosses felt more like milestones, with each one pulling you deeper into the story, pushing you to improve and get further with each run in order to piece everything together. And if you want to go one step further and get the true ending, you'll need to beat every boss again, except this time without getting hit. Now, most likely, you won't be able to do all of this on your first run, but with there being plenty of meta progression, each subsequent run will be a little easier than the last. For starters, after each run, you receive a bit of XP which you can use to unlock skills in your loadout. But rather than just increasing stats like your damage and area size, you instead have a skill tree. So rather than stacking up percentage increases, the skills you choose feel more like crafting a build, and since you can freely respec your loadout, there's no harm in experimenting with different builds like crit chance or status effects. Aside from that though, another big difference when it comes to the skills is that you can't unlock all of them, at least not at first. Basically, before beating the game, you have a max of 25 skill points, making the ones you do choose even more important as you try to beat the game. After you've beaten your first run though, you can actually unlock more skill points either by completing a run in overdrive mode, which gives you 1 skill point for each progressively harder level you beat, or you can prestige your account, which resets your skills back to 0, not counting the additional ones you've earned, and then gives you increased XP gain for skills. Aside from just the skills though, there's also plenty of different weapons and utility items to unlock, as well as some suits, which are basically like different characters. Some are fairly simple to unlock, with you only needing to collect 8 of a specific item, meanwhile others are a bit more complicated, requiring you to complete certain challenges, like finishing a run with 5 or less skills. Now, before finishing up, there were a few other things that I wanted to mention. For starters, I really liked that there were secret bosses. Now, I won't lie, I did have to look up how to find some of these bosses, but there were a few that I accidentally found on my own. Overall though, all the fights were genuinely amazing, and were just as engaging and fun as the regular bosses, if not more. Along with that, I have to mention just how good the OST by Milky Possum is. It perfectly fits in with all the themes and aesthetics of the game, and really gets the adrenaline pumping. But out of all the songs, the best would have to be the final boss song, Interstellar. Like, holy shit. Getting there after so many failed attempts, and then hearing the vocals kick in, was just absolutely incredible. Finally, I really appreciated that I didn't need to spend a ton of time to 100% the game. Normally, in games like these, I might spend 100 plus hours trying to get all the achievements, which eventually just feels like a chore. So having to only spend like 35 hours made the grind way more fun. All in all, Picayune Dreams is a genuinely amazing bullet heaven, with its engaging sectors, cryptic upgrades, intense boss fights, compelling story, and deep meta progression. It's truly a one-of-a-kind experience. So whether you're a fan of bullet heavens looking for something new, or you just love roguelikes, I cannot recommend Picayune Dreams enough, especially since it only costs $5. And even if you've already played the game, there's plenty of new content to dive into with the recent release of the Contamination update. And with that, mateys, is the end of the video. If you made it this far, I just want to say thank you, and I hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, take care, and I'll see you around, mateys.